A very warm welcome to our teaching, and I hope you had a very joyous Easter. However, this time of Easter, the Eastertide, is very important for us because this is a time leading up to Pentecost. And our teaching, my dear friends, is going to be in 5 parts. And I'm going to focus this teaching on the letter to the Galatians, chapter 5, verses 13 and to 26. As I said, it is going to be divided into 5 parts. I am also suggesting this reading, this text, for you to read it during this time of Easter. And I'm suggesting also this reading when people come to the sacrament of reconciliation. I am asking them to read this particular text, which is very profound as ever, given to us by Paul. So, first part of this teaching, and I have given it a title. It's Christian Freedom, Slaves to Mutual Loving Service, not Moral License. And by moral license, I mean libertinism. This first teaching is taken 3 important lines, verses 13 to 15. I read the quote. You are called to freedom, brothers and sisters. Only do not use your freedom as an opportunity for the flesh, but through love serve one another. For the whole law is fulfilled in one word: you shall love your neighbor as yourself. But if you bite and devour one another, watch out that you do not exterminate one another. So, the first part of this teaching is a general reminder about freedom. And what lies at the heart of this letter is the concept of freedom. Paul focuses his attention in this letter on the word freedom, and also how it is to be realized not by being slave to the flesh, by indulging ourselves, but being a slave in love for another, for one another. The strong word slave is there in the text, in the original. Paul here is expressing a paradox, which means, not a contradiction, 2 contrary truths that can coexist, exist together. And he is expressing the paradox of Christian freedom that involves being a slave to God's righteousness. And who made us righteous? Jesus Christ. He puts us in a good standing with God, although clearly not the slavery to the law of Moses as a mean to obtain God's righteousness. So, slave to God in Jesus Christ, but not slave to the law of Moses. Paul has already demonstrated in the letter that God's righteousness is based entirely in Christ Jesus, not in works of the law. He maintains that the life of faith in Jesus and the life in the Spirit is characterized by freedom. Freedom from what? Freedom chiefly from the law and its cares. And the cares of the law, if you do not obey the law, what happens? Eternal. There is a penalty. Eternal damnation. However, who paid for this penalty? Jesus Christ paid for this penalty by being crucified, being put to the cross. The primary concern of the Christians in Galatia is how to maintain this freedom in Christ without having the law as a means of a moral guidance to direct our daily behavior. Paul argues, just as Jesus is the fulfillment of the law, so the Spirit is the fulfillment and the substitution of the law as God's instrument of moral direction. In other words, the Spirit, when we are filled with the Spirit, replaces the law for the Christian, whose life is utterly determined by the presence and activity of the Spirit. And where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is freedom. This is a quotation from Corinthians, from the letter of St. Paul to the Corinthians, second letter to the Corinthians. Now, in order to understand this whole text, I'm referring to Galatians chapter 5, verses 13 to 26, and also to refer these three verses that I have quoted. We need to clarify two key terms. First, Paul uses the word opportunity. That's how it's rendered. And what this word was originally a military and warfare term that literally meant the starting point from which a military movement or attack is made. What we call it center of operations, headquarters. Though Galatian Christians are free, as I said, from the law of Moses, that freedom is not to become the springboard, the platform used by the flesh for its own worldly and selfish activities. So that's how he's using, Paul, the word opportunity. We can actually give it another word in English: incentive, occasion, pretext. But then there is the other word that is highly misconstrued and misinterpreted: the word flesh. Flesh, nothing to do. Flesh does not stand for sex. What he is trying to tell us, Paul, when he uses the word flesh, flesh does not primarily refer, and we are going to see this in the next few weeks, the list of 15 sins of the flesh. Those are activities, appetites, attitudes, propensities of the one led by the flesh. So the word flesh represents, in the first place, the entire humanity as captive of sin. When someone is captive to an addiction, whatever is the addiction, let's say stealing, he is being captivated by sin, by the flesh. And as a result of that, they are detached from the redeeming grace of God given to us in Jesus Christ, and, of course, the sanctifying work of the Spirit. So this word flesh stands for human behavior, not compatible with God's will. When I am not doing God's will in my life, I am acting in accordance with the flesh. And this behavior is demonstrated in actions on behalf of its captor. Who is the captor? Sin. And in producing in us, when I have got sin dominated, it produces in us desires separated from the guiding influence of God's Spirit. This is what Paul understands by flesh. Some scriptures, some Bibles, gives it an interpretation, sinful nature. But by giving that interpretation, you are not being faithful to the connotations of the word flesh. So that's one nuance. But also, the word flesh in Paul is referring to the whole human body, nothing to do with sinful, if anything sinful. Or, in other contexts, it indicates the power that pull the human being toward action against his or her will. That's when we need to understand this word and get it right straight away. Otherwise, we are not going to understand Paul, especially this quotation. So how can we apply this to this text, especially when Paul says, only do not use your freedom as an opportunity for the flesh, but through love serve one another. This part of the verse 13, is also corresponds to verse 15, the last verse, when there was a huge row within the Christian community. I'll quote, "But if you bite and devour one another, watch out, be careful, that you do not exterminate one another." So, between these two verses, there is a correspondence. The Galatians were behaving in a fleshly, worldly, selfish manner, not being guided by the Spirit. And this, when you are not guided by the Spirit within a community, that leads us down a path of self-serving and of evil attitudes and actions that eventually disintegrate the Christian fellowship, the community, and ultimately its disappearance. So the issue among the Galatians is typically human, characterized by internal strife and struggles and conflicts. And this applies to us. This is the message we can get. In our debates, egos set foot, and soon the issue is who is going to carry the day. The war of words among us becomes who is right, not what is right. So let us visualize this situation in the communities, in the churches in Galatia. How can we visualize it? That's how I visualize it. When we think of the situation in Galatia, we should have this picture. On one hand, Paul and the advocates of the law, those who are saying, no, in order to be a Christian, you need to be obedient to the law, are on a stage platform. And on the other platform, rival house churches at war with one another, resembling, and I like this, in Paul's suggestive language, he's suggesting this, a pack of wild animals preying on one another. The sad picture was undoubtedly caused by the Galatians' attitude of letting their freedom becoming a base of operations for the work of the flesh. So how does Paul tackle this crisis within the community? And he uses a very clever antidote to this mega division. First, the Galatians are to serve one another in love. Two, the law of Moses as a whole, its spirit and intention, is summed up in the commandment which is quoted from the book of Leviticus 19:18. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. So what Paul is essentially telling here to the Galatians and to us, Christians of the 21st century, is that it is possible to conduct themselves. It is possible for us to behave rightly without the need of the law. And this is my paraphrase. Paul is saying to you and to me, and to the Galatians, of course, if you live in the Spirit, you will have love. And living in love is far better than the law, because it is the fulfillment of the law. That's what he is saying, Paul. He is not against the law. He is saying it's holy, but the fulfillment of this law is by allowing the Spirit to work in you. And the word love, Paul, how does he define this love? Love for Paul is not an emotion, a passion, but is defined by Christ's loving sacrifice of his life. Given, this love is given by the Spirit and expressed in doing good to all humanity with the same alacrity with which we love ourselves, especially to our fellow Christians. God's free love for us manifested in Christ's love is reproduced in our faith-filled and free love for all. That's how it's manifested. It is Christ's free love, generated and inspired by the Spirit, that changes us so we can serve one another in love. And we can serve one another freely, because it's not, this gift of love is not coming from us. It's not coming from an external, so you've got to abide by, but it's coming from within. We know love because we see it on the cross. And to see this love is to be affected and enslaved by it. There is indeed one form of slavery that is compatible. Hence the reason why I said it's a paradox. We are slaved. What is it? With freedom in Christ, we are free, but we are at the same time enslaved, and in which we safely indulge. The slavery of mutual love. He loved me, and I've got to show this love. How? By loving one another. My dear friends, our Christian dignity of being sons and daughters through oneness in Christ demands concrete manifestation. And Paul ties our worthiness, this dignity, to the logic of all embracing love. Christian freedom leads inevitably to mutual service through love. Living in love, embodied in mutual service, is the ultimate goal of our Christian freedom. So Christian freedom, when I say I am free, is contrary to Stoic or Greek, what you call Greek philosophy. And for Paul, Christian freedom is defined not as autonomous, no, because I'm slave to Christ, but our ability for serving others by means of love. We will be seeing this when we look at the fruit of the Spirit. As I said, because it is God's Spirit who fosters, who inspires, who awakens love in our hearts, it is not our own product. Being able to love others is not the result of a book, of a discipline, or imposition by an external authority. It is a miracle because it is given to us. The more we allow the Lord to live in us, whatever he is pouring, we need to manifest it. And it comes from his Spirit, shown and demonstrated in our mutual love. God bless.